Hello, this is the continuation of my summary of Alistair Parker's short history of the Second World War, this one dealing with the War of the Atlantic from 1942 to 43. It forms part of Chapter 7 of Parker's book, The End of German Expansion on the Atlantic, North Africa and Russia. So the submarine war on British merchant shipping in 1942 and 1943. This was fought mainly between the British Admiralty and the German U-boat command. It was seen by both sides as being the determining factor as to whether or not Britain would be beaten, or even who would win the war. Grand Admiral Dönitz, Commander-in-Chief of the German submarine force and head of the German Navy from January 43, thought that sinking 700,000 tons of merchant shipping per month would defeat the British. In November 1942, the British Admiralty opined that this was the only campaign in which the war could be lost. That month, over 725,000 gross tons were lost, and the number of U-boats in action was increasing, despite losses of 5 to 10 per month. This is Dönitz, Supreme Commander of the German Navy's U-boat arm from 1939 to 43, then Commander-in-Chief of the German Navy, and very briefly President of Germany after Hitler's suicide. Although the situation looked grim for 1943, the battle had, in a sense, already been decided. American shipbuilding grew so rapidly that from August 1942 onwards, the construction of dry cargo ships exceeded losses apart from November 42. New tanker production also only exceeded losses from February 43 onwards. Dönitz just couldn't match that, though exaggerated reports from his U-boat captains may have misled him. This was mostly due to American production, which increased from 1,160,000 gross tons in 1941 to 13,500,000 tons in 1943. By contrast, losses of ships under British control greatly exceeded production. In 1942, Britain built 1.3 million tons of ships, but lost almost 4 million. Thereafter, production declined. Britain was increasingly reliant on the United States for its shipping and its access to imports. This, and the fact that the Red Army in the Soviet Union fought most of the German army, enabled Britain to survive, both preventing a German invasion and allowing an Allied plan to eventually invade continental Europe. Dönitz both increased British dependence on the United States and delayed an Allied victory. With about 140 U-boats on patrol in 1942, an Allied invasion of France was very difficult. With over 200 in 1943, he might prevent an invasion in 1944. A key factor, of course, was the American entry into the war. American entry initially gave U-boat captains new opportunities, as they could target ships sailing down the US coast, silhouetted against the city lights of the towns behind them. Nor did the Americans initially embrace the idea of convoys, despite Britain's experience in that matter. Code breaking was really important, and Parker goes into much more detail than I'll do here. Both sides were successfully able to crack their enemies' codes for a time, until the codes were changed or made more difficult to crack. Reading the enemy's codes enabled U-boats to find their prey more easily, and for the Allies to be more successful in evading attack. German successes peaked in March 1943, when 40 U-boats attacked 2 convoys out of New York City, sinking 10 ships out of 52 in the first and 13 out of 40 in the second, despite naval escorts. only one U-boat was sunk. But in the next 2 weeks, 525 ships in convoy entered the danger zone, but only 20 were sunk, whilst 22 U-boats were lost. This turn was gained mainly by tactical superiority. According to the First Sea Lord, by the spring of 1943, the Atlantic was so saturated with U-boats that evasion was almost impossible. There are a whole series of important developments here. First, very long-range aircraft, able to patrol for 4 hours at a distance of 1,000 miles from their base, equipped with searchlights for nighttime surveillance to pick up U-boats. 2. Shortwave radar enabled them to detect U-boats day or night. Escort vessels began to be equipped with it from October 42. This supplemented existing ASDIC sonar equipment for underwater surveillance. Submarines had short range and low speeds when underwater, so operated on the surface as much as possible. 3. High-frequency direction finding, the so-called HFDUF, began to be installed in escort vessels from July 1942. Standard by 1943, warships were thus enabled to locate U-boats when they signaled their base or other submarines. 4. The weight of depth charges was increased and their settings made more accurate. The new Hedgehog, I'll talk about that in a minute, enabled faster deployment by throwing the charges ahead of the attacking vessels. 5. Small escort carriers were introduced to provide localized air support in search and attack operations. This is a photograph of a Royal Navy Hedgehog. It's simply a weapon that fires a salvo of 24 bombs in an arc aimed to land at a fixed point about 250 yards directly ahead of the attacking ship. It added to the British arsenal of anti-U-boat measures. It's important to note the role of collective action in the defeat of the U-boats on the North Atlantic convoy routes. This involved the Royal Navy, the RAF, the Royal Canadian Navy, with also some help from the Royal Australian Air Force. Further south, the Americans. By July 1943, the total tonnage of Allied merchant shipping constructed since September 1939 exceeded the total sunk over the same time period. 26 U-boats were sunk in that month alone. Thank you very much for listening, and in particular thanks to my patrons, without whom I wouldn't be able to make these videos. If you want to support my channel, you're very welcome to do so. Like, comment and share on the videos if you will. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos, and I'll give Patreon and for the moment PayPal links if you want to provide practical support. Next week we'll talk about the North African campaign in 1942. Have a good day.